Okay, so excuse me. I'm really excited to be sharing this webinar with everyone today. Just want to make sure everybody's hearing me okay. I'm getting some thumbs up from people, so that's great. Um, and um, and we're gonna get this thing kicked off without any further ado. So today I'm going to be talking about how to simplify and reduce parent communication. Um, and the workload around that, and ways that you can reduce that by 80%. And these are lessons that I've actually we've learned at Hubbli from seeing over 2 million parent messages fly through our system. So we're seeing trends. We're dealing with schools every day for years. We're talking to them, and we're seeing what works and what doesn't work. And this webinar presentation is all about the lessons that we've learned, and we're really excited to share those with you today. So I just want to say, take a look at this picture for a second and tell me if this looks familiar. You know, um, can you relate to this picture at all? You see this, a school office manager, right? And there's paper calendars and there's binders and there's piles of money and sticky notes all over the place. But if you notice, the interesting thing is that there's this computer sitting beside her, that can actually manage all the same types of tasks, with the right software. And so that computer could actually take care of everything in a fraction of a second, as opposed to doing all the different manual, manual processes of collecting these papers and collecting the money. There's actually this machine, but the question is, like, how do you get it to do that, right? That in itself is a big, it's a big task, learning how to use a computer beyond, typing into it like you would an old school typewriter. So you're in the right place if if you spend hours managing communication tools and systems, and if you spend hours every week managing piles of paperwork, and you're in the right place if you'd like to spend more time on higher value tasks like face-to-face conversations with parents, existing parents, and also prospective parents and children. So one thing I want to mention before I move on, is that I want you to stick with me all the way to the end of the webinar. And if you do so, there's going to be a really awesome bonus for you. But I'm not going to tell you what it is yet, because I want you to be motivated to see all of this information. I know it's relevant to you and you need it. And so that's my little carrot. And I'll let you wonder what it is for now. Don't focus on it too much. Just know that there's something really great for you at the end. So just talk about the goals of today's webinar. So what you're going to learn. So the goal number one is learn how to use each communication tool the right way so that parents actually read your messages and are informed. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you how much time that would save you if you didn't need to send repetitive and messages all the time, and wonder and chase after people just to make sure that they know what's going on. And the learning goal, the second learning goal, is how to centralize all the communication tools into one system, so that you don't have to learn learn multiple systems, how to manage contacts in multiple locations with multiple databases. That in and of itself is a major time saver. And goal number three is how to reduce the time and money that goes into using paper in the office. And I say money, obviously, when you buy paper and printer ink and you pay for repairs or you send things postage, there's a dollar amount to that, but there's also much more money, much more expense put into the time that it goes into managing the paper. So this is goal number three. And I want to talk about why am I teaching this subject here. So a little bit about me. I actually started out, before I was doing Hubbli, Another software company I was managing was called Expert Online Training, and it was like, basically for summer camp staff training software, like e-learning for summer camp staff. And after helping summer camps develop better staff training and communication systems, the parent company that I was working for that owned Expert Online Training actually asked me to build something for the school sector, and that's where this whole thing began. And that was back in 2011, and I had already been building learning software and communication software for summer camps, which, if if you know much about camps, you probably do, because they're so similar to schools that everything almost translates directly over. So actually, we were building that. I've been working on this as far back as 2008, selling software and building software for the summer camp industry. And it's incredible how almost identical the communication needs are of a summer camp for a school. So my first task when the company asked me to build something for schools was to go out and talk to people in the school market and understand what the problems were and where the needs were. What I very quickly learned was that parent engagement is incredibly important for the success of students. And that's something that's different than summer camps. Of course, parent communication is important, but really, I would say in a school setting, in a traditional sort of classroom setting, because they're coming home every day and there's homework and there's assignments. Everyone is, everybody is talking about how parent engagement is essentially the holy grail. Everyone's talking about it. Every school district has page after page about it on their website, and every university department of education has a lot of dedicated resources on parent engagement. They usually have a whole department, and they've got people doing research on it, but no one's actually addressing what I have discovered as to be the biggest roadblock to parent engagement. And I want to make sure you understand that I've spent years now building this, and what I'm going to tell you is not anything that you probably don't know already. I know more than anybody that everything I learned from you guys. I learned from people managing schools, teaching in schools, and I've done a little bit of teaching myself, but I've obviously been focused on software more than anything. So I'd say the question to me is, why is it so bad? Why are schools having such a hard time managing communication? So the reality is that schools are not run by digital communication workflow automation experts. They are run by education experts. So they're essentially creating really bad communication systems and these patchworks of systems. There's no standardization from one teacher to the other. If you could, imagine what it would be like to go to your doctor's office, and experience a completely unstandardized form of communication, or let's say a bank, or even McDonald's. If everybody at, let's say, McDonald's could decide how they're going to do their job and how they're going to, let's say, accept payment. Like, if you could imagine going into a line at McDonald's and you go up to the cashier and she says, you know what, you go to hand her a credit card to pay for your Big Mac, and she says, I don't like technology. I don't like the credit card thing. I just prefer cash. So do me a favor, just give me the cash. That's what I like to do. That's a little bit insane, right? Like that staff, that cashier would probably be let go that day. At the same time, what we see in schools is that everybody is essentially deciding how they are going to communicate with the parents. And I don't want to get into how much autonomy and teaching approaches and all that stuff, autonomy that parents should have, sorry, that teachers should have. Of course, autonomy is really, really important. But, standardizing communication processes is really, really crucial. And we're going to talk about why. So, the result of not having that type of standardization is that parents are being trained to ignore school staff, to ignore school communications, because the communication experience is so bad that staff are just sending repetitive information over and over again. It's kind of like a vicious cycle if you think about it, right? Like, parents want to have communication and they say, we want to be informed. So the school says, no problem, we'll send you the information. But they don't have a way of really knowing who saw what or if they read it. And it's really difficult and time consuming to channel communication so that, this information is 100% relevant only to this group of parents. So we're just going to send that to them. And then this information is only relevant to those parents. And, so what happens is that becomes very difficult. So schools just send everything. But parents then say, well, this is kind of this is just, a lot of this information doesn't have anything to do with me. It's time consuming. It's kind of annoying. So they start ignoring it and they start dodging it. And then what happens is their parents are uninformed. So schools start pounding out more information. But again, it's like the fire hose, right? Parents are getting, if you talk to parents, if you ask parents like we have, I've talked to thousands. Everybody tells me the same thing. They're getting information from a number of sources, a number of channels, repetitive information, and there's always a catch-all that's going out all the time. So there's not any standardization. It's not well organized, and it's certainly not. Most of the information that parents are getting is not relevant to them. But the problem is that the information that is relevant to them is hidden inside of a majority of irrelevant information. So what happens is, the parents that are actually paying attention and informed are actually being punished for the ones that aren't, right? So the more parents are uninformed and complain that they don't know what's going on, or the staff have to make sure everyone's informed, and then they have to spend hours chasing after people. So it's this vicious cycle that just keeps getting worse and worse. And you don't really know how to fix it except for just do more, which is, what we hear from a lot of schools. So, the other side of the coin is how frustrating and time consuming it is for school staff, to use these systems, right? So I want to talk about my family a little bit. Like, we live here in Toronto, and my wife is an early childhood educator. And, the Ontario Ministry of Education really pounds on the paperwork for, it seems to be that the earlier years get, actually paid the least, and they get the most paperwork piled on them by the ministry. So I really do know firsthand how much time she puts into doing paperwork and documenting the progress of children she teaches, and the painful processes that she deals with, for different at different facilities, because things are being done by paper, and there's a lot that has to be done. So the secrets I'm going to talk about today are all based off thousands, and I mean thousands, of conversations I've had with school directors, teachers, parents, office managers, communication directors, enrollment directors. And when I start telling you these secrets, you're going to say, well, Jono, I know that already. But, the reality is that like many big secrets, they're actually sitting, they're sitting right in front of you, like hidden in plain sight. And that might sound like a cliche, but it really is true. Like, the best way I can describe the conversations I have with people in schools is like, just like you, is to say that it's kind of like slowly lifting up a mirror in front of their faces, and then they notice that their hair is on fire, but for some reason they didn't quite notice their hair was on fire. Like, you could kind of smell the burning, see the smoke around you, but you don't, like, there's a problem, but it needs to be fixed, but not really quite sure, where the fire is or how to put it out. So that's really why I built Hubbli, um, and I'm here to show you, how your hair is probably on fire. But the good thing is, I'm also going to show you where the water is, so you can put it out and get relief. So let's talk about that fire. And I also want to mention, I'm just talking about Hubbli because that's a platform that I built to make the systems that I'm going to teach you, easy to all centralize in one place. But nothing I'm going to talk about today requires you to use Hubbli. You do not need to be a Hubbli customer to use this information and to get value out of it today. So what are we seeing? So basically, on average, we see about 20 communication tools used per school. Now, you might think that's high, but I have conversations with school leaders every day, and when I ask this question, they usually say, we use 5 right off the bat. When we continue the conversation, though, we start to talk about all the ways that schools actually communicate with parents: newsletters, announcements, invoices, documentations, progress reports, enrollment processes. The list just keeps on going, and we generally find that not only does the office staff use 10 tools just themselves, but every teacher seems to have their own little patchwork of communication tools as well. So what I want to do is I want to do a poll here. I want to hear from everybody. How many communication tools are you guys using? Feel free to list off a few in the chat box here. Okay. So tell me. So let's hear it. I want to hear from everybody. And we'll just pause here while we get some responses. So tell me, how many tools in the chat box, how many tools are you using at your school to manage communication? Just throw out a number, whatever comes to your head, and maybe even throw out some examples. Maybe I'll throw out a poll as well. So what we're hearing, MailChimp, Gmail, QuickBooks, Child Manager, Facebook, text messages. Of course, Natalia, you use Hubbli as well. And I'm wondering why you're using all those other tools or you're using Hubbli, but we could talk about that. Flyers, whiteboard on the wall. Charlene, sign up genius, email, text, website, phone, face-to-face. Okay. So yeah, these are all the things we hear from everyone we talk to. All right. So all of those tools that we just mentioned, generally what we hear is that they take on average about 2 hours per month to manage every tool. And so if you add all that up, that's actually a lot of time. And so we see 50 hours per month spent on managing piles of paper. We see $2,000 a month spent on managing paper, ink, and postage, and the time that goes into managing the paper as well. So for a school that has 100 students, we've determined by speaking with many school leaders and school consultants, schools are spending $35,000 per month on staff simply managing communication tools. That's per 100 students. And now let's take a look at some statistics here. You know, the market size for the private school is actually not growing very much, and enrollment rates are declining. So what does this mean? Well, you know, I'll give you my take as someone who's been consulting and developing system for schools. I honestly think that these numbers don't look great. And let's be honest, they're not. But if we look at the reason why they aren't so great, that actually should give us a lot of hope. Because the bottom line is, and I don't want to come off as rude or cynical, but as soon as schools start running their schools more like businesses, like the rest of the business world, the impact of that will be enormous on the school. So I want to make this point really clear. You know, if we take a look at those numbers that I just ran through, there is some, you know, some drastic improvements that can be made with some simple updates to their system and processes. And so any school that is finding it challenging to increase enrollment, or finding that they're having a hard time, they're spending more money than they used to, or they're having a hard time creating margin, all of those things are really, really easy to solve if you know what you need. And what we're seeing in schools is that, generally speaking, the people running the schools don't know what they need. What they're amazing at is how to educate students, what to say to parents, and what to say to staff. But what we're finding is they don't know how to take the processes going on in the school and bring them up to the efficient processes that businesses are using all over the world now in 2016. So I don't mean to brag or anything, but this slide is just to show that, like, you don't have to just take my word for it. We've got a lot of people using hubbli, and this software is built around the processes that I'm talking about today. We're currently, it's used by over 10,000 people. So there is some credibility behind what I'm saying, and trust me, if I can figure this stuff out, if I can implement this stuff, then there's nothing but hope for everybody. Trust me on that one. So now I want to talk about a success story. Here we got Pat Kenefick. Okay, she was a communications director at her daughter's Montessori school, and she was managing 10 communication tools and spending 2 hours per tool per month. And when she started using hubbli and using these systems, she actually got to decrease all of that, and it saved her 20 hours a month just on communication tool reduction. So again, this isn't something that you need hubbli for, but if you understand how to build a system that's not redundant, that is centralized, where you've got one database that manages, that all the different communication tools are based off of, that can be drastic reduction in workload. Now we've got Corey Pierce. He's a teacher, and he's actually a music teacher, and he likes to do a lot of field trips. But when he wanted to do a field trip, it would be 3 hours of paper form management, right? And generally about 10 parent phone calls per trip. So a lot of time. So his field trips, were few and far between, because he'd have to go to the office and get a bunch of photocopies. Like, the secretary would have to make the form, and you have to get it photocopied, hand it out to the kids, get it back from the kids, over time. So he's actually a high school teacher, so he's actually giving it directly to the kids. If if everyone else is, if anybody has ever tried to use students to be a carrier pigeon to the parents, you probably know how painful that can be to get the forms signed and back. And so So it would take him about 3 hours per field trip, and 3 hours of like not really great experience. Like he'd be moving around with this ever growing pile of paper while he is managing managed over weeks while he tries to keep on collecting the forms. And he started using hubbli, and he was able to reduce all of that. And actually, he was in 1 year he did 14 field trips, and he managed them with less than an hour, because because he had a digital form system that made it all really, really easy. And then we're going to talk about Amy Geller. So Amy is a parent volunteer at a Montessori school, and at the beginning of every year there'd be parent packets that went out, and she would actually volunteer for the school and spend 2 weeks basically helping the school manage all this paper, gathering the forms from the parents, and spend 4 to 5 weeks chasing parents around for like volunteer management. But she would spend weeks like taking the paper and manually typing the information into an Excel file or FileMaker Pro. And that is like, I mean, it's interesting. It's like they're using a system, they're using these, this software and this technology, but because there's this paper process in between, it's almost like pointless, to be honest, because it's so much work anyways. Like like weeks, literally weeks of like getting volunteers or staff to do this work every year. And that's a lot of work. So after using hubbli, and again, when I say hubbli, I just mean after using a digital form system, digital processes that remove the paper and make it so that you don't have to use this archaic form of communication and information management any longer. And the result was the school doesn't need her to volunteer anymore. They don't need her anymore. It's like she does other things, but in regards to this process of the parent packet and everything, her time is like, she was really dedicated as a volunteer. Of course, now what can they do with her? She's a really smart, capable woman. She actually works full time as well. So, now they can use her talents and her knowledge and wisdom towards some higher value things rather than just, remedial paper piling. Okay, so I spoke to a lady recently that said she had to reschedule a meeting, and it took 45 minutes for her to simply look through this like spaghetti-like email thread and figure out who could or couldn't, make the multiple different proposed times by each person. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that, but if you are using email for group conversations, you are really doing yourself a disservice. It is so painful. Every email system you use actually organizes information differently. So when people are hitting reply all back and forth, it can be pretty challenging. And I'm a pretty tech savvy guy, and I use these systems and I analyze them. And I say like, Gmail, Apple Mail, all these things, actually tracking the sequence of conversation just between two people inside of an email system is not that great of an experience. And if you do reply all with a group, it is absolutely a mess, and it looks like spaghetti, and it's pretty, it can take 45 minutes to an hour just to figure out or do something as simple as reschedule a meeting. Why does that need to take so much time? It really doesn't. And I just want to share this picture because I love it, and I I want to be a little bit lighthearted. I'm talking about, all these pain, but I just want to say, every time you hit reply all, if you think about this little cute kitten being chased by these strange, I don't know what they are, these little monsters that look like chocolate bars. I hope this reminds you in a lighthearted way that you should never, ever, ever hit reply all. That is just, not only is it doing yourself a disservice, but you're going to kill this cute little kitten. So, everybody here knows that school admin directors are responsible for making sure everybody, from parents and staff knows what's going on. So like, you know precisely when the immunization records need to be submitted. You've got the school filing system memorized, like it like your social security number. and you know the dates and times of all the upcoming events for the next 4 months. You know, you've got all that stuff committed. It's in not only in your memory, it's in your short-term memory, right? So unfortunately, you usually wind up repeating the same information multiple times for different people who are, you know, who aren't quite in the know, right? So like between phone calls and emails, comments on social media, like you probably spend a good portion of your day. I hear people tell me even half their day just answering questions and disseminating information. So if that, you know, relates to you, you know, feel free to throw in a comment and say, yeah, like that's real, that's realistic. So I'm sorry, but if it is realistic for you, I think that's a huge waste of time. You know, like why is a half or even a quarter of your job just running around like a carrier pigeon, right? Like there are much better ways for group communication and decision making. So and there's much more important things for you to be spending your time doing. If you're a school leader, there are more important things for you to do than to be the actual system that is like sending reminders, like yourself, right? So I'm going to show you some features on Hubbli, but these can all be replicated on various tools if you want to figure out how to patch them all together. So social group threads are much better for group communication, and that's why I'm showing you here. This is an example of a Hubbli group. Okay, so if you take a look, you know, when there's a conversation that's organized well, as opposed to like a reply all email thread that, you know, is you know, like a mess. If somebody has a question on a social thread, this, you know, this same thing works on Facebook, of course, and other group-based social networks. You know, everyone can see the answer to a question. So if the teacher, you know, makes an announcement inside of a Hubbli group, and then somebody has a question, you know, when the teacher answers that question, everybody can see the answer, and so that question is answered for everybody that might have had that question, and that teacher doesn't have to field the same question by everyone at the same time. So you know, social groups are really an ideal way to reduce tons of time and effort around managing communication. There are so many uses for it, but that I would say is just like the way they are a social group thread with a history of communication, people being able to see the conversations, that itself can be a drastic reduction, can create a drastic reduction in the amount of communication management that you have to do on a moment-to-moment basis. And you know, and I want to make sure, I think it's really important, something that we've learned, that when you post something in a system like Facebook or, you know, Hubbli, that notifications are sent out, right, automatically. And you know, parents will generally be able to turn off those notifications, but the benefit of a system like this is that you know, like you want to you want to make sure that parents don't have to log in to multiple systems, and I can't tell you how important that is. So if you look at this example, this is like what happens when somebody posts in a group like this inside Hubbli. You know, we've got multiple options. You can send a text message at the same time, and you can also track, for every message, you can track who got it, who opened it, who clicked it, and who replied, or who didn't get it. And if you could imagine, and again, this is what Hubbli does, and there are other systems that do this, right? And that's the point I want to talk about here, is that if you know, if we go back to a point I made earlier, if you know who did not get the message, then that means you don't have to blast everybody that already got the message. You can follow up with those that are uninformed, and you get to see a pattern, and you'll see who is checking or who isn't checking messages, or who is informed, and it gives you the ability to use your time way more efficiently, rather than just chasing after everybody or just hitting everybody with the same message over and over again. So I'm going to jump down to this next screen here. Another really important thing, I did talk, you know, just not having to log in. This is a diagram we use when we're showing people how Hubbli works. And other systems work the same way. Another example I could think is LinkedIn, actually. So the point here is that when you've got users in a system that's your communication system, you want to make sure that they don't need to log in. And I really can't stress that enough. Like, so whatever tool you use, you want to make sure that anything that happens in the system notifies them, most importantly in their email. That is the most important thing. And you want to make sure that they can just reply from that email without barriers, without having to click anywhere or log in to see the message or anything. You want to make sure that they can just reply from that email. So in this diagram, it's really just trying to show you that you've got, let's say you've got two users on either side, and they could be using whatever email tool they like to use, Outlook, Gmail, Yahoo, whatever. But the system that they use, that the school uses, in this case it's Hubbli, those users don't have to log in. They can just communicate with each other through email. But if it's set up the right way, if the system works in an ideal way for schools, that communication is still going through Hubbli, because they're both users in the system. And then all that conversation is archived inside that communication system. So you can actually see a history of communication between staff, and and that itself can be really important. Two most important things here is that they don't have to log in to the system to get the information or reply to it. That is very, very key if you want parents to actually use your communication system, and that it tracks the communication between your staff and your parents, or your staff and your staff, or your parents and your parents. So it's really, really helpful to know who read, received, or replied to a message. I'm assuming that could be advantageous to you. And now I want to talk about newsletters, okay, and what should be going into newsletters. And I'm just going to pause for one quick second, and I just want to see. I got a message here in your last slide. Would we know who didn't open their email? Yes, you do know who does not. Yeah, and I want to also ask, are there any other questions regarding what the types of systems that I'm talking about so far? Hit me up with any questions. I also want to mention that in the poll that I sent out, half of you guys said you have more than 5 communication tools, and half of you said that you've got more than 10. So it's pretty. So what we're talking about is very, very relevant to people here. Okay, so I'm going to continue on, and I'll check in with some questions a little bit later. So newsletters. So there is a time and place for newsletters. But if you are using groups and other tools the right way, those notifications that we just talked about should be taking care of the majority of your day-to-day announcements and updates to parents, right? You want a system that automates those types of things, right? Like, you make an event, it goes to the right people. You make a post, an update in your group, it just goes to the right parents. And so newsletters can then actually be used what they're best used for, which is less frequent communications, right? That can talk about your school on a higher level, right? So if they are not bogged down by day-to-day details, because this is what we see in schools, a list of like 1,000 upcoming events and a whole bunch of reminders, all in one long email sent to everybody with like really small text that's hard to read because they got to get so much information in there. If you don't have to do that because the system deals with that stuff in a much better way, then your newsletters can be much more thought out and can be much more engaging and targeted, and be way more valuable to your parents and your prospective parents, right? So they should be focused on parent education, parent inspiration, giving them tools and understanding that they can use at home with their kids, right? So your newsletters now become a value add rather than something that just gets dodged by parents. So this is an example of the hubbli newsletter designer. Has all the functions and features you can find in other email tools like MailChimp or Constant Contact or MadMimi or Roble. I mean, there are so many different, really good, newsletter tools, but none of them are really built for schools specifically, and they're all separate systems, so you have to manage them separately. But if you're to, there are ways that you could actually get them to tie into each other, and you want to make sure that your whatever tool you use, it's connected to your one central database without having to manage a separate database, especially with newsletters, because that emails change all the time. It can be very, very time consuming to keep that up to date. Okay, so I want to talk about email in general, because we're talked about email notifications and newsletters, but email is a it's a bit of a beast of a topic, to be honest. So let's talk about the do's and don'ts of email in general. And by doing so, we want to learn to really love our email inbox, right? And that just doesn't go for the school staff, but also goes for the parents, right? So don't use email if you need an immediate response. That's not good for that. So you just can't rely on your parents to be checking or managing their inbox well, especially because it's so easy to search and find old emails. People are less and less inclined to keep on top of their inbox, right? And this might be obvious, but don't use email in an emergency, right? This is probably overly obvious to everybody here, but I want to throw it in for good measure, because email is not an emergency alert system for the same reasons that I just mentioned, really. So don't send everything to everybody at one time. That's the next don't, right? Don't send everything to everyone all at the same time, which I just wanted to touch on that point again. Schools today are literally, not figuratively, quite literally, behaviorally training their parents to ignore them. So let's focus on, the golden rule here, right? Put yourself in your parents' shoes. Would you like it if you're, if your bank, sent you, newsletters filled with information about other people's accounts, right? You wouldn't like that. Even if it wasn't like sensitive information, obviously that would probably be very illegal. But you don't want to know about, like information, or even like sort of ancillary information about other people's accounts at their bank, right? So I'm not talking about sharing private details, but you don't want to know like when their account's set to expire. Like that's not really that important to you, right? So one of the first things we learned from speaking to parents is that again, they're getting continuously smacked over the head with irrelevant information. So what should you do with email? So in summary, what is email good for? Well, think of the scenario I mentioned, getting your bank statement. I don't want snail mail sent to me. I don't want physical paper sent to me. I want email. I want my statements in email. So why is that, better? It's better because it's an archive. Let's take Gmail as an example. Like Google is a really spectacular, amongst other things, their main thing where they really, really started that they do better than anybody else is search, right? So, and they're not the only ones. Like, search is something that a lot of email providers do really well. So if you want your parents to have an easy time finding regular but not urgent information, right? So you can send them emails, and that's really what it's meant for. So use it in the right form, and in the right context, and whatever system you use, you want to make sure, even if it's not urgent, you want to make sure that it's 100% relevant. Okay, so you need to make sure that your emails are not, like, they don't have irrelevant information in them, because you will not only be ignored, but you will be turning off your parents. They really don't appreciate it, just like you wouldn't appreciate it from anybody else. And by the way, almost every school director I talk to, or school leader or communication director, they have kids too, right? And their kids either go to their school or they go to other schools, and they tell me the same things. I ignore the emails from my child's school. And I find that to be astonishing, but it's because it's just too hard for schools to manage and filter, right? So you need a system that automatically filters the information for you to the right parents. And as I mentioned earlier, the average school is spending approximately $2,000 per month, um, with the cost of buying paper, printing, photocopier repairs, postage, and of course, many, many hours per week. So you need to stop using so much paper. So I'm going to talk about some ways of doing that. So forms should be digital, right? Like, the idea of using paper for forms today with all the different tools that are available is, I don't know, I think it's a little bit crazy. Yeah, I mean, so what we're looking at is just an example of a form on Hubbli, a simple, field trip form. But that's like, like, again, you don't need to use Hubbli for this. There's a lot of different digital form options out there. And they can be connected to other databases or whatnot that you might be already using. So this touches back to that parent packet that I was talking about, right? If you're sending out 20 sheets of paper, every time, whenever enrollment comes around, if parents have to fill out the same information on 10 different forms by paper and then bring it over to you, send it back either with the children or bring it back physically into the school, that's not a great experience for the parents either. Of course, it's, on one side, we were talking earlier about that volunteer, Amy, right? She would spend weeks and weeks just collecting paper and transferring that information into a digital system, doing it manually, typing it in, reading the paper and typing it in, which is, like, of course, a bunch of opportunities for human error, for misinformation, for making mistakes. But it's beyond that, it's just time consuming, and it's really, really, really annoying. When you've got digital forms, like, you don't have to ever do that. And so that's good for you, but for the parents too, they don't love it. They don't like getting 10 different forms where they have to write their name in, put their child's name in, sign it, put their contact information on 10 separate forms, and it's all the same information. So, using digital forms on Hubbli, your parents have an account, all that standard information is just already auto-populated. I mean, that type of stuff really should not have to happen to anybody. Another great use for digital forms. So this is an example. Hubbli has another feature for polls, right? So polls are a great way to make decisions, or even just to get consensus within a group, right? This is another thing that you could do rather than sending reply all emails, right? Everybody can just, let's say you need to reschedule. So that lady I spoke about earlier that had to reschedule that meeting, and it took her 45 minutes just to figure out who could do what, or what was the most ideal day for everybody. So if you were to run a poll like this, and there are tools that do this, Doodle is one that comes to mind. Doodle is a great one for that too. SurveyMonkey is another one, right? So this is how Hubbli does it. But people could, you could whip up a poll in like 30 seconds, and you could, get everybody's input on, what's the best day to have a meeting. Or you could also do it, you could ask anything. You could ask, like, what, you could poll your parents on what snacks do you want in the vending machine. The point is, if you're doing this over a group email thread with a reply all functions, it's a daunting task. And rather, a poll is just, it's actually pleasurable, and most importantly, the person that's managing it, that is like, the parent volunteer or the committee leader or the staff person that actually is responsible for making sure that meeting happens, can do it in a fraction of the time and have all the information organized for you without having to do any work. And when you're dealing with a digital form provider, like Hubbli, or what are they called, Formidable, or Woohoo Forms, there's a list of digital form tools out there. You can organize your entries, so you don't have to type them manually into a spreadsheet or database. system, for weeks at a time. So, when you have to find something, it's simple, right? Because you're doing a database query, right? So in Hubli's example here, when a form is entered for a child, it just shows up on the page. So these are all the different form entries, whether it's an attendance form or a progress report or emergency information, who the teachers are filling it out or parents are filling it out. It's like it turns, it's like instead of having a physical filing cabinet, it's like a digital filing cabinet. But if you could imagine that, finding the information is like a couple clicks on a keyboard or a mouse, rather than thumbing through thousands of pieces of paper, which is incredibly time consuming. And this is where we're talking about, death by 1,000 cuts. Of course, there are times when it's like, weeks of like incredible amounts of paperwork, like when it's like, the parent packet management, but also from moment to moment, day to day, you got to run over and grab this file or that file or look up this information or that information. If you gather all those 5 minutes here and 10 minutes there, and sometimes 20 minutes over there or 30 seconds, if you gather all of that up, how much time is that? That could just be instant, because, digital forms are instant. So take a little break. Are there any questions on this subject so far? Feel free to throw a question in the chat box. So let's see here. Anne-Marie, I like the idea of digital forms, but here in Illinois, DCFS wants to see all paper forms in a file. Okay, so that's a great point. And so one thing you want to make sure of, this is what we do at Hubbli, but if you're using a digital forms option, which I really, really implore you to do, generally they will allow you to also print certain forms out, right? Or any form, right? The point is though, like, so with Hubbli as an example, if I'll just let's go up here for a second. So, on Hubbli, for an example, you could print out any of these entries, okay? Or you could print them all out. So you could grab all the entries of a particular form for a particular child and print them all out at one time. Any digital form tool will let you do this as well. And that means that, the forms that need to be printed out can be printed out. And, Hubbli has a digital signature and, can handle any scenario that you need. Most form, builders or whatnot have those types of add-ons as well. But, the point is that it's fine to print them out because the state requires it. And we understand that. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to be looking for the information through paper. So, collect the information, have the parents fill out the form, no problem. Do that digitally, and then, look up information that way. But and print off whatever you need to print off, so it's there when the state comes in. But there's only certain forms that you actually require to have physically printed. Everything else can be digital, and even the ones that you've got printed, they should still be in your database digitally. If they come in, but if they cut, the point is that they come in, they're actually submitted, they're filled out digitally. That way you don't have to physically transfer them over, and you can always spit them out through a printer once they're digitally gathered. I hope that's making sense. But yeah, we see that from every state's got, generally speaking, got certain forms that have to be printed out. So our customers just get those certain forms and they print them out. You could just select all and hit print, and they all print out, and they put them in a filing cabinet. But they never use those printouts to actually look up information, because that's where you really, really lose the most time in your day. Hope that makes sense, and that's a great question and great point. So on to the next topic here. How to use your website to boost enrollment. So up until now, we've been talking about internal communications, right? But what about external? Like, how do you effectively communicate with potential parents? So most Montessori schools today increase their enrollment numbers. Most schools today. Oops, I just jumped ahead for a second. They want to increase your numbers, but not every school can afford an employee to sell their school's quality. So when set up properly, your school's website can really knock out the task of teaching parents more about your educational programs while also increasing student enrollment. So a couple of points you really want to make sure is that when you're writing when you're writing content on your website, you write often and consistently. So the best way to keep parents informed is to update your blog as often as possible. Once parents see that you're is the best way to learn about your school, they'll be more likely to do so, right? So your blog is a really great place to answer common questions and notice what your parents are asking and keep those things up to date. So, and above all else, when you're writing, blogs on your site, you need to make sure that you're consistent. So not only are you writing often, but it should be the same time, the same day and time, ideally the same time, at least the same day every week or every 2 weeks or every month, whatever it is, it should be consistent. So one of the most important elements of internet marketing is trust, and trust is built with consistency, right? So ideally, you want to send out a post around the same time and day every week. If you think about it, another way, like how bad does it look if a parent was to actually go to your blog on your website and see articles in like a sporadic timeline, right? So like one post this month and not the next month, and then nothing for 3 months, and then you see something a month, and then another 2 months there's nothing there. So like this is likely to put the rest of the organization at the same light. They might, you're presenting your organization, right? So you want to make sure that parents see you as consistent, and even if it's just once a month, they want to see that you're organized and consistent, right? You don't want them to look and see an inconsistent management style at the school. So here's an action tip, right? When you want to, this is the type of thing you want to pull out your pen and write down, okay? So when you're writing your blog at your school, you want to agree on a theme each week and ask your team members to come up with something relevant, to match. So this really makes it much easier to decide what to discuss. So like, use your teachers and your team, to carve out a posting schedule. And that's not too daunting, and just assign everybody a week. And that's something that makes it really, really easy. The other thing here, I'll say, make sure that whatever you write, it's really relevant, right? You want to write useful, parent-focused content because that is your audience, that's your customer, right? So if you look at Hubbli, we write content for school leaders, right? If you look at our blog, this webinar, everything that we do, it's writing content for the people that are our potential customers or our existing customers, and everybody benefits from it, whether you're a customer or not, right? And that's our goal, is just to keep on helping educate, people, school leaders on, so you should be writing content, for parents, so you want to make sure that you're writing content that your prospective parents or your existing parents can benefit from. And if you think about it, you could be teaching, you can actually be teaching those prospective students even before they enroll in your school, right? So, some ideas that you can generate, for parent topics could be, how to get your kids to eat healthy, or the top 3 strategies for handling sibling fights, things that the parents can take home that day and use, right? That's like really valuable to them. And and if you ask yourself, like even with somebody that like 1 year went with another school, well, if in that process they signed up and they were getting your newsletters, your blog posts, right, and they're enjoying the content that you're sharing, there's a good chance. And let's say that the other school that they put their kids, there's is not doing that, and they're not really engaging and connecting with them. If you are the school that's engaging and connecting with that teacher or that parent, then there's a good chance that they're going to move their child over to your school. So you want to think of it not just not just your current parents and not just your prospective parents that are in your existing funnel, even the ones that leave. You want to keep on engaging them and make sure that you keep on feeding them really, really helpful and useful content and information. And you want to make sure that the context makes sense for your school and the message you're trying to convey, of course. So just make sure that whatever you write, the more you can help your parents, but by providing tips, education, helpful advice, or inspiring information as well, the more likely it is to resonate with them, and get value from it. So here's another action tip. Have your team brainstorm a few possible topics for your blog, and be sure to keep one master list of ideas, so everyone is on the same page, right? And you can ask each teacher to come up with a topic, and you'll have the next few months planned out in no time. But you don't want to go too far in advance, right? Just 1, 2, 3 months tops. It doesn't have to be like, you don't have to be thinking about the entire year, or just stick to even just 1 month. That's a reasonable thing to to bang out even in a half an hour session. But it'll just make sure that your blog is constantly fresh with topics that are still relevant to everybody. Okay, so another thing you want to do is use dedicated landing pages when running a campaign. Okay, so in the digital world, so the question is, what is a landing page, right? That's like marketing language. Online marketers know what a landing page is, but not every school leader does. So in the digital world, a landing page is simply a page that any website visitor can land on via a web search or an ad campaign. So think about like a typical banner ad. You've probably clicked on 1 or 2 in your lifetime, right? So the user, or the parent in our case, is in Facebook, and they see an ad, and they'll find something interesting and click on it. So in its simplest form, you can think of a landing page as like a digital flyer that lives on your website. It contains all the important details about your school, yet it's written in like a condensed, impactful way, similar to a paper mailer or a flyer you might send out. And that towards the end of the page, they'll have an option to immediately sign up for your inquiry process or the enrollment process, or just put in their email address to learn more. And it's ideal if you can create some urgency or scarcity to motivate the parent to take the next step. So for example, enrollment is filling up quickly. Secure a tour now, right? You want to just give them a reason to take action. And so when done correctly, each visitor or parent, right, in this case, chooses to take action right then and there, right? And so there shouldn't be anything else for them to do. There's one thing that they can do on that page, and that's one of the key points of a landing page, is that there are not any other links, not even a home button. You can't even go home to the website. It is a flyer, and there's either you leave the page or you perform the action, and there's just those 2 options. And I can't stress this point enough. Don't just buy some ads or pay someone to do search engine optimization and have them point to your site's homepage. Okay, that is not using those dollars well. So though you might get some value, it's going to be much less efficient and next to impossible to actually track the efficacy of the ad or the web page or the campaign that you set. So landing pages are really, really crucial for marketing funnel measurement success rates. And don't just send them to your homepage, right? So this is an example of a landing page funnel. Okay, so traffic here, let's say, like I talked about, it's an ad, and they click on the ad and they go to the landing page. So that's where you capture your lead, right? And then what can happen is, if you've got the right system set up, you can actually start sending out automated messages, which generally is called an email drip, upon filling out the form. And once they fill out the form, you can add an automated tour scheduling feature. Then that can cut down the steps and time it takes to get this prospect to the next step of your enrollment process, right? So this, by the way, is something you can get out of the box with Hubbli. But if you're interested in learning more about how we can automate your entire onboarding process, we'll have information for you after the webinar. But how to create high converting landing pages, like whenever you create one, you just want to make sure that the goal of the page, right? And you identify the important keywords, right, that people are searching for. It's really, really important. So So generally speaking, this is like a really simple, campaign funnel. Traffic comes in from Facebook, they hit the lead capture, they sign up, they get automated emails, and they automate, and then that takes them to the next step in your enrollment process, which is generally speaking, booking a tour. And again, you don't need Hubbli to make all this stuff automated, but we just do it for you really out of the box the way a school needs it. You want to make sure that you're displaying some more information about those pages. Is you want to make sure that you display important details prominently and above the fold. And what that means is that the depending on the display that they're seeing it on, you want the design of those landing pages to get the most important details on the first view without having to scroll. So that's just another key thing to keep in mind. And you really want to add buttons too. So add buttons and enrollment boxes. So this is just a couple examples of ideas that we've seen around that are really good examples of how to use landing pages and the way to organize the information on a page. Small short forms with big buttons, 3 big points, and somebody hits that, and it's pretty clear what the most important goal is on this page, right? So calls to action is it's just something you should keep in mind. So should all be in there above the fold and really easy to see. So now that you understand how easy landing pages are to create, I really think you should make sure you take a look at your website and see if you've got these elements there. Okay. Because there are tools out there that make basically they're like landing page tools that kind of can integrate with many systems. Hubbli has it as well as one of Hubbli. Again, Hubbli is all about centralizing all these things, but you can find individual landing page tools out there that will give you a one-click landing page set up, all configured. So you just go in, it's like a template. So you don't have to be a Hubbli customer. We've got it, but there's a lot of options out there to do this. But it's really, really important that you've got, you're distinguishing between a landing page for a campaign and just regular website content. Another thing I want to suggest is make it like stupid easy for parents to get in touch with you, right? So with useful content, parents will undoubtedly want to take the next step, towards learning more about your school or even starting an enrollment process. But let's make it as easy as possible for them, right? So I've got the Google search page here just because it's a great example of when you go to Google, you know what to do. So think about that. Like, what's the call to action? This page is the best example that has ever existed of, simplicity and making it painfully obvious what I'll say stupid obvious, what that user is supposed to do when they get there. Okay, and here is really the holy grail. Okay, so what we're looking at here is full process automation. All right, and again, like this is just an example of something that you can do inside Hubbli, and this is also something you can do with multiple tools if you know how to get them to connect with each other and link to each other. And the prospective parent here, let's just say this is an enrollment process. Okay, so this is a really again, just one of many things you could do to automate the workflows that go on in your school office. Things like paperwork, forms, scheduling, notifications, and staff tasks. So let's just say a prospective parent fills out an inquiry form. So any digital form tool can connect to autoresponders. And by submitting that form, the parent can be sent an email, and it can send an email to a staff person. A staff person can get notified, hey, got another submission for inquiry for enrollment. And then the staff person could go in and view all the inquiries and see what the status is. And they can go in and they can have a meeting, right? Like one of those emails could have a link to scheduling the tour. Right. So, somebody mentioned Sign Up Genius. So Hubbli has the same feature where you can actually, a parent could go and schedule, a prospective parent could schedule a tour, but you could tie in, Sign Up Genius to your digital form provider and link people to that, and then again, the staff goes in after the meeting, can update the status depending on, you've got some conditional logic in there, and then depending on the status update, if let's say the application form is accepted or put on waiting list or rejected, a different autoresponder could go out depending on which option was selected, right? So let's say they are approved, right? They've been accepted. So you've pre-created an acceptance email that goes out, goes to that parent, and gives them something to do, and then takes them to, says, congratulations, little Bobby's been accepted to the program. Click here to fill out the enrollment form. I mean, all this stuff, you should never, ever, ever have to write the same email twice. If you have an email that like, you should be standardizing your process. A parent that gets accepted should get this email, and a parent that gets rejected should get this email. And you shouldn't have to do more than click a button for the right email to go out to the right parent in the right scenario. So, a system like Hubbli can automate all of that for you, and you should be striving for that, because that's where you can reduce incredible amounts of workload. So I want to ask everybody here, what do you think? What do you think about all of this? So why did you show up today? I'm not exactly sure why you showed up here today, but I bet I can guess. Okay, so you probably want to be able to send messages to parents and trust that they get read. But you don't necessarily trust the system, and you have to keep on following up and resending the same communications over and over again. And you want to free up your time from boring, repetitive, remedial activities like sorting through sheets of paper, so you can spend more time on higher value tasks that have a